One of the most popular activities in woodworking is making and selling small items like cutting boards, but it can be a grind and you can feel like you're doing an awful lot of work for the amount of money you're making. In this video, I'm going to explain everything I know about making and selling cutting boards, from design to workflow and even pricing your work. And then I'm going to explain how none of that matters unless you're doing this one thing right.
I knew it!
All right, let's dive in. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is where to sell your work, because that's going to be just as important as what you're selling. One of the easiest ways to start selling your work is to do it locally at events like craft fairs and farmers markets. Typically, this is going to cost you a nominal entry fee to be able to display at the event, and you're going to have to spend some time building out a booth to be able to display your products. But then you're on your way. But this type of selling can be tough going for a few reasons. Your pool of potential customers is relatively small. Another problem with these events is they typically have more than one booth selling the same kind of product, and that's going to put your competition directly in the same room with you competing for those customer dollars. And also, these events are typically geared towards very transactional impulse buying. People who don't really know you or your brand are looking to get something that they don't really need and do it for the least amount of money possible. Although selling locally at an event like this is a great way to get your business started, my first tip is to take your business online. We all live in this big interconnected world, and I think that's a good thing. Heck, you're watching my video right now. It's also good because your pool of potential customers is much, much bigger. When you first start looking for places to sell online, you're probably going to explore using Etsy. That's the first place I sold my boards. Etsy makes it really easy to set up your own shop, set up your products, and start taking customer payments. And while Etsy does have the ability to expose your product to a wider customer base, I think it has too many similarities to selling at a local event. Here, let me show you. Let's just do a search on Etsy for cutting boards. Look, there are over 250 pages of results before my search tapped out. How the heck are people ever going to find you in all that mess? Not only that, but you're competing with businesses who aren't really small businesses like you. They have the ability to produce thousands of items in a full-scale production shop and sell them for ridiculous prices that you can't and shouldn't compete with. And even if someone did manage to find you in all that noise, check out what else Etsy will do to you. They'll show your competition's listing right on your product page. That's nuts. Talk about hard to sell. So tip number 2 is to get off Etsy as soon as you can and set up your own online shop. So to do this, you have a couple of different options. You can build your own website using platforms like Squarespace or WordPress. Both of these allow you to make impressive websites that allow you to display your product as well as take customer transactions. Or you can leverage selling platforms like Shopify, which allow you to design websites specifically for selling product. Either way you go, you're going to have complete control over branding and the look of your store, and most importantly, your customer is only going to see your product. And here's a pro tip. Selling online means that your customer can buy from you first and then you can build the product, versus selling at a craft fair where you have to make all your inventory up front and hope that somebody buys it. That's a key advantage in creating efficient processes. But because your website is not Etsy and it doesn't draw a million customers a day, you're going to have to figure out a way to drive people to your website in order to sell them. Just hang on to that thought, because before we get there, I want to talk about what to sell. Tip number 3 is to create recognizable designs or something that can be identified with your brand. You don't have to necessarily invent something totally new. You just have to create something that is identifiable to your brand and makes it stand out compared to the competition. One way is to play around with unique and contrasting colors. I like putting highlights in my boards using exotic wood species that create bright red, yellow, and purple pops of color. In addition to selling traditional woods like walnut, maple, and cherry, most hardwood dealers will also carry exotic woods like purple heart, bloodwood, padauk, and yellow heart. These exotic woods are more expensive, but because you typically use them just as accent colors in your boards, you're not really going to increase the overall cost of materials that much, but you are going to increase the wow factor. Another thing you can do is play around with design elements. This was one of my most popular cutting board designs, and it has this awesome underbevel all the way around the perimeter. Not only is this a design element of the board because it gives it an interesting visual look and makes it look lighter and thinner than it really is, it's a pretty chunky board, but it's also a functional element of the board because now I've got finger grips on any side, so no matter how I want to pick this board up, it's going to be super easy. And that's the type of stuff you really want to look at building into your products to add some extra value for the customer and set yourself apart from the competition. Okay, tip number 4 is when designing your boards, consider how labor intensive they're going to be. There's some ultra intense and awesome cutting board designs out there, but they all tend to take a lot more steps in order to create them. And more steps means more labor and time involved, and you need to bake that into the price of your work. This US flag cutting board was one of my most popular designs ever, but it takes a lot of work to produce. This board is in grain, which means you're going to have an additional glue up for that. It also has to be assembled in sections, so that's going to add another step to the process. And this wooden star inlay is a whole other process that you have to do before you even get to assembly. I ended up having to price this board at around $350 just to cover all the labor involved in making it. And even then, I finally stopped making them because they just interfere with my production process too much. And tip number 5 is to give your customers plenty of options. One thing you should never ever do is assume you know what your customer wants. Make sure you offer your boards in different sizes. I would offer a board like this in 5 different sizes, from 12 by 12 all the way up to 24 by 30. I even sold these little 8 by 10 bar boards. Aw, aren't they cute? Offering different size options like this increases your chance of making the sale because you're giving the customer different options between sizes as well as price points that fit their budget. And here's another pro tip. Larger boards tend to sell for more money, but take very little additional labor to make. Here's an example. Let's say you have 2 boards, one 12 by 18 and another one 20 by 24. You feel pretty confident you could sell that first board for about $175. And you figure you could easily sell the second one for $250 since it's almost twice the size. For the first board, you've calculated the cost of materials to be $30, and for the other, since it's twice as big, will be $60 for that one. You figured your labor cost on the first board to be $100, and for the second one, since it takes a marginal amount of effort more, maybe 15 minutes of extra sanding, the labor comes out to $115. So, if we do the math on the first board and subtract materials and labor from the price, you see that the profit on this board is $45, which is a 35% profit margin. But for the second board, your profit shoots up to $75 or 43% profit margin. Woohoo! So if you had to make one of those boards today, which one would you want to make? Tip number 6 is to add value by offering extras. There's some great ways to make your product stand out and make some additional profit as well. You can offer features such as finger holds, juice grooves, and even little rubber feet as add-ons to your boards. And if I were you, I would never build these into your boards without a request. Don't just assume that the customer is going to want those things. Give the customer the option to add those things to the order. And also remember that adding these things is going to add labor to the cost of the board. You can decide whether to charge an additional fee for that feature, or if there's enough margin built into the board, you can offer them as a free upgrade to entice your customer to buy. Another thing you can offer are complementary products like this. This is a wood conditioner made from beeswax and mineral oil. You can make this a lot cheaper than you can buy it and make a pretty good margin on it. I think this is a great way for you to show your customer that you care about the product that you're selling and want to make it as easy as possible for them to maintain it. I have a whole video on my channel about how to make this stuff and where to get the materials, including the tin, so I'll leave that link down in the description if you want to check that out. When it comes to building cutting boards, the largest expense is often not materials, it's labor, and so you've got to figure out how to minimize those costs. And that's tip number 7, which is to create efficient workflows. It's not at all efficient to build one cutting board from start to finish before moving on to the next board. There's glue ups, sometimes multiple glue ups, and those take time to wait to cure. And you also don't want to be ripping lumber at the table saw, throwing sawdust up in the air at the same time that you've got a cutting board with a fresh coat of wax on it. What I found that works best is to do my work in batches. If I've got orders for 5 cutting boards, well then I'm going to cut all my rough lumber at the same time. Then I'm going to do all my work at the joiner and planer. Then I'm going to do all my glue ups at the same time. You get the idea. And here's another pro tip. Make your glue ups the last thing you do before you close up shop for the day. And the next day, you'll be ready to move on to the next step. Another important thing is if you're going to be doing finger holds or juice grooves, create custom jigs or setups that make those as quick and accurate as possible while maintaining safety. That can be a very nerve-wracking part of the build because if you screw it up, you could permanently damage the board and have to start over. And tip number 8 is to consider the trade-offs between material and labor. Most of the time, rough lumber like this is going to be cheaper to get than S3S or S4S pre-surfaced lumber. But buying pre-surfaced means that you don't have to do any work with a joiner or planer. I actually have a video that shows how to make simple cutting boards using pre-surfaced lumber and minimal tools, and I'll leave that link down in the description below if you want to check that out. Depending on prices and availability in your area, it might actually be better to go with pre-surfaced lumber and skip the additional labor cost, especially if you haven't yet even made the investment in a joiner or planer. Do your research, figure out what's available in your area, and do what's best for your current situation. Tip number 9 is to consider automation as fast as your business will allow. If you're already an established business or you're a beginner and you've got some extra cash, investing in a CNC or laser engraver is a must. If I had to choose one to buy first, I'd go with a CNC, and here's why. They unlock your ability to differentiate your product by giving you the ability to do custom engravings like names, logos, and other personal touches. But they can also be set up to do jobs for you like cutting your juice grooves and finger holds. Automating that process is going to minimize your labor cost and also reduce the likelihood of making a mistake and ruining the product. My business really took off when I began to leverage my CNC for this kind of work. Alright, so you've stuck with me this far, but now it's time to deliver some bad news. Your work? It's not that special. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure you do fantastic work. But even if you put everything that I just told you in place in your business, there are still thousands of other makers out there who can do just as good or better job than you can. If you ever want to separate yourself from the pack and command those high prices for your boards, then you need to leverage the one thing that those guys don't have: you. And that's tip number 10. Get good at selling yourself and your brand. The key to increasing the price for your boards is to increase the demand for your brand. And you can decide what that brand will be. You could choose a logo, something memorable and recognizable, or your brand could be just you, yourself. The main thing is to create a brand that you can attach to your work so people can remember it. And speaking of people, you need to put yourself where they're hanging out. Tip number 11 is to change your approach to social media. You need to stop being a consumer of content and start becoming a producer of content. Create brand accounts on apps like Instagram and TikTok and keep these separate from your personal accounts. Don't get me wrong, you want to share yourself and what you're doing on your brand account, but you want to keep it focused on your work and your brand. I spent a couple years building a brand presence on Instagram before my business really became serious. I would post multiple times a day with content related to what I had going on in the shop. Confessed my love for walnut. Show people how awesome it is when you hit that board with the first coat of oil and the colors just come alive. And make sure your content isn't just focused on the finished product. Show people the process. Make them appreciate what goes into making those boards, and there's no better way to do that today than with video. People love watching you work, and share yourself too along the way. Let people know who you are. Anything that helps people build a strong connection to your brand will get them invested in it. This is going to be the fuel for the engine of your business, and it's going to help you start to charge more for your work than you ever thought possible. And the last tip I have for you is to test your pricing. As your brand grows, the demand for your product will grow, and this is where you can start getting away from simple profit models and start really testing your brand power. If you find that you have a high level of demand for your product at your current price, raise your prices. If you raise your price and demand still isn't slowing down, raise your prices again. Keep doing this until you find a good balance between the amount of work you're doing and the amount of profit you're making in your business. Always ask yourself the question, would I rather sell 2 boards for $100 each or 1 board for $200? Wow, that was a lot, but that is everything I know about selling cutting boards. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video, and I hope that you learned something that you can take away, put into practice in your own business. Now make sure to watch these other videos that I've got lined up here if you want to learn a little bit more about some of these processes. And until next time,